So welcome everyone. My name is Shelley Cryer and I'm the new volunteer VP of Voter Services for LWV Greenwich. I want to thank my fellow board members for helping to organize this event, and Burning Tree for being a wonderful host, and for all of you for attending on this rainy, hot day. And sincere thanks to our legislators for agreeing to participate. And could we turn off the music?
I think it's nice
Nancy, would you mind trying to get the music turned off? So LWV Greenwich is a nonpartisan organization that all of you probably know well. It encourages informed and active participation in government and is dedicated to increasing public understanding of major policy issues. If you aren't already a member, we encourage you to join and support this critical work. The purpose of today's event is to give our state representatives an opportunity to discuss their accomplishments of the past session, as well as issues still on the table in Connecticut. It's a chance for constituents to ask questions, and given the national events this past Saturday, this is an opportunity for all of us to reflect upon what we can do in the coming months to promote civil discourse and to tone down the election rhetoric. We've received many questions in advance, and we also want to leave time for additional questions from you in the audience that come up over the course of the conversation. So as such, we're asking our representatives to keep their responses as tight as possible so that we can get to as many questions as possible. All of you will be given the chance to answer all questions. However, we hope you will pass if you feel a question has been adequately answered. And I may give a friendly wave if I'm hoping you might wrap up an answer. We are also asking our audience members to keep your questions to questions. And that gives everyone a chance to speak. And if you want deeper dialogue on a personal level, please pursue that outside of tonight's event. So thank you so much for that. So that's all the speaking I'm going to do, except for asking questions and trying to move the conversation along. And we'll let each legislator go first in rotation. But let's start with just a quick self-introduction with your name and your district and how long you've been serving. And start here, this side, Steve.
Come on.
And you please use the mic and hold it as close to your mouth as possible.
I don't think that's ever been an issue. So I'm Steve Meskers. I've been your state rep for 6 years. I've been blessed to serve this community, which I love. And I sit on the insurance and real estate, which is a troublesome committee, in that it's very difficult to deal with healthcare costs, as we're all suffering from that. I thought I was going to go in and wrestle it to the ground in 2 minutes, and so much of it is related to federal regulations that's tough. The second piece I do is I sit on energy and technology, ditto in terms of complications, although I think we're beginning to make some strides. And I'm blessed in this past year in a battle, or marketing campaign, to become chair of commerce. And there my sole and poignant focus is economic growth for the state, because as I go around to our community, all I hear people complain about is taxes. Sorry, better? All I hear is people complain about taxes. So on commerce, my focus is economic growth north of Fairfield County. And my goal there is to shift the economic growth and benefits, or economic growth and the benefits to the state, somewhere north of us, so that there's other pockets of taxpayers in the state that help balance out the demands for social services. So those are the three committees. Plus I sit on bonding, revenue, and finance, but there are about 28 or 32 people, so I can't claim great fame at the bonding, revenue, and finance side. But I think my strongest influence is as the chair of commerce. And I'm pleased to serve you, and I'm looking forward to the dialogue.
Good evening. First of all, thank you all for coming. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for organizing tonight's event. My name is Rachel Khanna. I represent the 149th District, which is about 2/3 Greenwich, east of Lake Avenue, north of the Post Road into North Stamford. And I serve on the Appropriations, Transportation, and Government Administration and Elections Committee.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting tonight. Thank you all for braving the weather to be here. I typically prefer my dark and stormies with rum. That would be quite but I'm glad we're here nonetheless. My name is Ryan Fazio. I'm in my third year in the State Senate. I represent all of Greenwich, parts of Stamford, and parts of New Canaan. I am the ranking member of the Energy and Technology Committee, the ranking member of the Planning and Development Committee, which is issues related to local government, planning and zoning, and so on. I'm also a member of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee and the Transportation Committee.
Thank you, Brian. Good evening, all, and thank you very much also to the League of Women Voters for your invitation, and to all of you for being here today. I am Hector Arseno, and I am honored and proud to represent the 151st District in Hartford. I serve in 3 committees: Education, Higher Education and Environment, Higher Education and Employment, and welcome to global warming, climate change. I serve in environment. We choose probably the right day to talk about environment and the right week in terms of what we are seeing in our part of the country. Thank you.
Thank you. So now starting with Rachel, we would love each of you to talk about the greatest accomplishment of the past session or highlights of the work. So Rachel, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we've had a really great past 2 years. We, first of all, voted for and passed the largest income tax cut in Connecticut's history. We further protected women's reproductive rights. We supported stronger gun safety legislation. We got early voting passed, which will be in effect in November, 14 days. You'll be able to vote 14 days before the election. And also on the ballot will be no excuse, does not have no excuse absentee voting. And so this would mean that you would be able to vote by absentee ballot without having one of 5 excuses or reasons to do so. And we'll hopefully also streamline the process with early voting. We, in this past session specifically, we held strongly to our fiscal guardrails and passed a stabilization bill to use expiring federal COVID relief funds to cover some of the needs that we saw come before us on the Appropriations Committee, specifically higher education, mental health, early childhood education, and nonprofits. And so, you know, that was very important to us on the Appropriations Committee because we saw the need for these different areas, but at the same time, we understood that it was really critical to abide by our fiscal guardrails. And also in the budget, in the 2023 biennial budget that we voted on in 2023, we had made the largest ever investment in K through 12 public schools in the state, which was a big accomplishment. And the Greenwich delegation in the past year was instrumental in bringing back millions, tens of millions of dollars in funding back to the district for schools and neighborhoods. Specifically, we got roughly $20 million for the reconstruction of Central Middle School, $6.5 million for the Glenville Road Safety Project, which is a project that had long been stalled, and hundreds of thousands of dollars for our nonprofits, for the Greenwich United Way, the Greenwich Library, a lot of money. That was a big accomplishment. Another thing I'd like to note is that our state's fiscal health is very strong. We have made significant payments to reduce our pension debt to the tune of $8 billion, which should save us $700 million a year in our general fund. And our rainy day fund is fully funded at $4 billion. As a matter of fact, recently, Moody's and Fitch, 2 of the big 3 credit rating agencies, upgraded Connecticut's credit rating. And so it really confirms that Connecticut is on the right track. And so that's all very exciting news, and I'm very proud of what we've accomplished.
Yes, and then we'll talk about challenges. So
Okay.
focus on that.
Well, I think that there were positive developments in the last 2 years. I'm proud to have participated in some of them in a bipartisan fashion. I think this past year was actually one of the most positive years for the cause of local control of decision-making for our towns and cities, especially with regard to planning and zoning. I was very proud to author and pass Senate Bill 333 into law, which the governor signed, which will give towns and cities back their rights to make basic decision-making related to planning and zoning and some other development decisions that was taken away from them a year prior in an omnibus bill without a full vetting. It quite actually, the previous law had quite actually totally taken away the ability of towns and cities to make any changes to their charters related to planning and zoning commissions and regulations. And we were able to repeal most of that, and I think that was an enormously positive achievement. I was also happy that we achieved minor bipartisan 830G reforms, which makes it a little bit easier for towns and cities to get a moratorium under state statute 830G, which is the famed or infamous affordable housing appeals process law passed in 1990. That was a bill where they incorporated some good ideas, some ideas I didn't necessarily like, but ultimately I was among a minority of Republicans who voted for it because a proposal that I had co-authored to give us more leeway under 830G was incorporated into it, and I think that the the people who helped negotiate that law did so in good faith. I think that there were good, positive economic reforms across several dimensions. I was happy to be a part of on the Energy Committee. We passed a law that I think will provide reasonable supports for nuclear, for hydropower, which are zero carbon reliable forms of electricity and a little cheaper than other forms of renewable clean energy, as well as giving Eversource and the other utilities a little more competition in the deployment and development of certain electric infrastructure. I think we have to keep our utilities honest, especially when they're sticking a finger in the eye of the consumers in many cases. I think the year before there were also positive developments, and we can go into those probably later, as well as maybe areas where we need to do more as a state legislature. But in this past year, those were the three areas where I was happiest or most proud.
Thank you. Education. And tonight we can divide our attention between the education bills and the education construction bill, specifically the reimbursement for Central Middle School. Before I jump into that, and the laws that we passed during the current year, in the prior session, 2023, we passed $260 million in budget for the public school system in Connecticut and the reform of the education cost-sharing formula that benefit us in Greenwich. And in this last session, we were able to maintain that funding and not to change it. Require some negotiations with the governor's office, but we were able to keep what we approved in the biannual budget in the prior session. Bills that were passed include the simplification of the state teacher certification process and also a bill easing state mandates on school districts. And very important for us here in Greenwich, bills that we passed was a 1-year pause on the state law regarding racial imbalance in schools. And back then, before the session, Greenwich was not in compliance, and that we might have required busing of children from different schools. So we worked hard in the education committee, and we were able to just have a 1-year pause on the state law, and will be some analysis on how we measure racial imbalance in the state. And also important for our district was the Greenwich. The Greenwich is in compliance with the Science of Reading program. Some of you might know that Greenwich was one of the districts that after the law was passed in prior sessions, was found not in compliance with the science of reading, and so that required some discussions, talks, presentations, until we obtained the result that our Board of Education was looking after. There will be meetings with the Education Commissioner in Hartford, and that will be held in the near future, but we are in the right path, and I require to be present on those meetings. If there is any questions from the audience regarding the process of the Central Middle School reimbursement, I will be happy to address them. Higher education and employment, my other committee. Good bills were passed, incentives for student loans, assistance, tax credits for employers that claim the credit for assisting payments of student loans. And in the ARPA stabilization bill, that it was $360 million that was approved during this last session. 160 million were for UConn and for the state colleges and universities. 8 of those 160 million, 80 million were for state colleges, 60 million for UConn, and 22 million for UConn Health Center. Just here, the state universities and community colleges represents approximately 70,000 students in the state, and UConn around 30,000. Of the 70,000 students that are in our state colleges and in our 12 community colleges, basically 95%, between 90 and 95% stay in the state. They are our workforce. They are the workforce for our industries and business. Environment. In the email that we received from the League of Women Voters, we were informed that questions had been collected in advance. One of them was disappointments of last sessions. So I will leave in HB 5004, the implementation of certain climate change measures for that part of the evening, if that is okay, plus other disappointments in environment. Bills that pass: a ban on products that contains PFAS, chemicals highly toxic, an important solar energy bill that contains provisions advancing different programs, an invasive plant bill also passed that includes 7 new species, standards for spraying herbicides along railways, rights of ways, and a dam safety bill allowing DIP to intervene when private dams present a threat to public safety because of poor conditions. In the bond bill, we had 25 million for heat pumps rebates and 10 million for waste reduction. And that's basically it, and I will leave the rest of the part of environment for my disappointments. Thank you.
Thanks, Hector. So now over to Steve.
So I don't want to be repetitive, as I was advised beforehand. So obviously, stepping back 2 years was the bill for the $6.5 million for the Boys and Girls Club. So in addition to the other funds, I was happy to see that we've gotten money for our nonprofits. I think thematically, one of the concerns for our delegation and one of our focuses has been on our vulnerable residents, our youth, and our seniors. We also got money for the roof at Parsonage Cottage, which is part of our assisted living facilities and part of our housing authority in Greenwich Communities. In terms of business, my focus, after fighting aggressively to get to be the chair of commerce, has been to right the ship or grow the commercial aspects of the state. Towards that end, last year we increased the biennial contribution, or 2 years ago, biennial contribution from 25 million a year to 35 million a year, so basically 50 million over the last biennium to 70 million on the current biennium. I'm hoping to increase that for toxic soil remediation. And why? Because the history of the state, Waterbury, I believe, was the brass capital. It could be Danbury, but I think it's Waterbury. We have an aged infrastructure of factories and buildings that were part of the industrial history of the state. One, we want to see them come back to life. We want to see those buildings repurposed. We want to see them back on the tax rolls. That's one of the bills I'm very proud of in terms of moving the state forward. Additionally, conversations locally and with the advocates for the marine industry, we created a small harbor fund dedicated to getting funding in the coming years to fix issues related to dredging and on all of our small harbors. Why? Because the commercial activity in those harbors is so important to those communities and for careers in them. So that's been a big issue for us. I would say on commerce, and that this is the difference as you ask us about, we talked about the issues at the national level. Commerce as a committee, I would say every bill but one was completely bipartisan, and I think out of 151 people, I sat there at the board like a cheerleader and we probably lost 5 votes or 4 votes out of 151. Right? So we were working as a team and as a group. The only bill that I received some pushback on was the regulation of the State Historic Preservation Office. Now, not partisan. I got about 30 people voting in no, or 25, and they were evenly split between Democrats and Republicans. And the bill was a reform of the State Historic Preservation Office. The goal being, I went up to Waterbury, we were looking at a building, a factory being reconditioned as a Board of Ed building, and the requirements were to restore 200 windows at a cost of $3.5 million to wooden restored windows with single panes. No solar, no thermal, potentially no insulation. I looked at the arguments in town on the Board of Ed, and I thought I'd go up to Waterbury, and a town that's distressed, and I'm going to tell the Board of Ed they're going to have to heat and cool a building and maintain authentically restored windows on a repurposed building. And that's kind of where my focus went. So it's not that we overrule SHPO automatically, the State Historic Preservation Office. Some people have painted it that way. I offered to go up and paint the museums by hand myself. The goal in place is to sit there and to have the Economic Development Office of the state do an economic impact study of the decisions of the State Historic Preservation Office. We are not going to get involved in historical sites that have tremendous value to the public. We're going to look at repurposing something on the order of, I think it's 1,200 or 1,400 mills and factories within the state that are not in commercial use right now. So it's to be able to make something happen that's better for the state. So that's my biggest issue that I got pushback. It was very interesting. I couldn't figure out the partisan nature of it. It's kind of, you sit there sometimes and you get an interesting group of people. And I knew I was doing the right things if I had a small group disagreeing with me and it was a bipartisan group disagreeing and I had strong support from a bipartisan. So I'm happy with that. So commerce, I'm looking forward to that, leaning in this year. In fact, I was up in Mystic yesterday. Is that a signal? Is that a signal? Okay. And I was up in Mystic because one of the bills I put out of Commerce, which hasn't got much attention down here, nor do I expect it to, is to look at commercial. It is Brazilian, I'm pretty sure I know the song. And it's commercial development of the Mystic Commercial District with an overlay of historic preservation. The traffic in the area is horrible. There are tremendous, it's like our own version of Watch Hill. Tremendous tourism going on there. We have a seaport, we have an aquarium. I want to see what we can do to accommodate traffic off-site with trolleys, etc., kind of bus trolleys, to try to build the economic impetus, again, growing Mystic. Why? Because we have a 735 sales tax on restaurants, and we have a hotel occupancy tax. And if I can grow the amount of people who do their tourism in-state, it eases the burden on Greenwich on taxation. And I want to see two things. One, to see what we can do short-term and long-term about making sure that revenue generated from those types of economic activities go back to further develop them. We have an incredible state with an incredible coastline. I don't want to turn it into Miami Beach. I don't want to overbuild it. but I'd like to make sure that people can enjoy it and that we solve traffic issues and that we make all of the experience of being in Connecticut wonderful. That's my commerce story. Energy and technology, I think, Ryan, we were talking about, it's energy efficiency, it's looking at carbon footprint, it's hydropower, it's trying to reduce the carbon footprint. I mean, as we see the storms, the big problem with anything we go into carbon footprint and partisan complaints, we're all sitting here in town. If you ask Public Works, I just got yelled at, well, didn't yelled at, conversed with the people in, for the golf course down, Hector, remind me, which golf course are we talking about? Yours, the one in Millbrook. I was down in Millbrook, and we're looking at rebuilding Route 1. That Route 1 rebuild is going to increase the aperture that goes from the high school down through by about 3 or 4 times. And if you think about what the rainstorms look like today, there are concerns about whether that aperture and the climate with the tropical storms we're getting now, do we have capacity? So I think when we talk about it, we talk about climate change, we talk about the carbon footprint, we are becoming an area where externalities are becoming internalities. We're getting problems with water, with drainage, with runoff. We have to address the issues as best we see fit because we want to protect our tax base. We don't want to flood out people in nice parts of town who pay a mill rate and support our services.
And Steve, I might stop you there.
I think you just have.
Okay. So I think the opening question is, those were all great and substantive answers to really frame the evening, and it was great to get that background and comprehensive background, so thank you, and thank you for your work. So now we'll move on to disappointments. Some of you have already flagged a few of them. So let's do disappointments kind of as bullets, and then let the audience ask if they want to go into them more deeply. So disappointments and priorities for the work ahead, starting with Ryan and taking it from there. And if you already mentioned a few disappointments, you don't need to repeat them.
So both disappointments and priorities.
I think if you feel like you can do it in the same answer.
They actually dovetail well.
Yes.
I was a little concerned at the end of session that we were basically bumping up or threatening to cheat against our fiscal guardrails, which have brought our fiscal house closer to order here in Connecticut. Those were passed in a bipartisan fashion in 2017. Scott Franz, when he was the co-chairman of the Finance Committee, helped to author them. I think with the spending packages and the bonding packages that were passed at the end of session, the bonding package increased the total debt issuance in the state annually by $350 million, and the ARPA package, the spending of one-time federal monies, was mostly used on recurring types of costs. And so that means next year, not only have we increased our overall fiscal burden that will eventually have to be paid back by taxpayers, but it also means next year when we actually try to write a full budget, that the needs, the asks are going to surpass the revenues. And so that has me significantly very concerned, especially because many voices at the senior-most level of the state legislature are threatening to, making it a priority to break in some form some of those fiscal guardrails and spending restraints, which is the only reason we were able to deliver a minor tax cut last year in bipartisan fashion. So I'm concerned about it. It's not a 5-alarm fire, but next year it might be, depending on which tact some of the most senior legislators take on the budget. I was also kind of disappointed by the lack of action on improving affordability and access to healthcare in the state. I think we had a few different positive options that were mostly bipartisan, which could have been adopted, that would have increased access and reduced costs. It's funny when Steve at the beginning was saying that he thought the biggest problem on the insurance committee was the costs. I thought he was going to say the people. And he is probably nodding his head that he agrees, because there are some people on that, and I won't let him say, I'll say it myself, that there are some people who are, shall we say, very stubborn and maybe, I don't want to say Soviet in their view of economics, but there was a great bipartisan proposal, the Association Healthcare Plans, which would allow businesses to pool their resources, arbitrage a little bit around some of the healthcare regulations. Steve's a big supporter. Kerry Wood is probably the biggest supporter. He's a moderate Democrat from Rocky Hill, and the Republican caucus is universally in support. So I had also been working on a major healthcare reform of certificate of need, which would potentially reduce healthcare costs by 5 or 10%, as it has in the 15 states it's been implemented. So those are top priorities for the future year. So again, so priorities for the next year: finding bipartisan answers to healthcare access and costs, that certificate of need, association healthcare plans, finally reducing kind of taxes on licensed workers, which constitute about 25% of the state's workforce. I had a bill that passed the Senate unanimously. I worked with Democratic Senator James Maroney from Milford on it, that would cut annual taxes on licensed workers down to $100 per year. They shouldn't have to pay, a preschool teacher shouldn't have to pay $900 for the right to work in Connecticut if they're licensed and they meet all the requirements. That's ridiculous. These are not high-income people. We should make it easy to work here. So licensing reform is a key, and that will help economic growth and upward mobility. And then the fiscal guardrails, protecting the fiscal guardrails, having tax reform in the long run that could lower the rates on middle-class families, and also reforming our pension, our treasury system. We have some of the lowest, over a long period of time, not in the last year, it's gotten better. Over a long period of time, we have some of the lowest returns on our pensions and our assets in the state. We manage $56 billion of money compared to a $26 billion budget. Those returns, if they were on par with the average state in the country over the last 10 years, we would have $10 billion more in tax revenue. You would have thousands, tens of thousands maybe, dollars more left in your pocket if we only had adequate pension. We don't manage it the same way, govern it the same way, so reforms along those lines are very important to me too.
Thank you. If I can briefly on this appointment summarize the 5 points that we covered on the climate bill. Number one was support for school districts to install renewable energy at the school buildings. 2, pursue the installation of 310,000 residential heat pumps to reduce emissions and cut energy bills for both in heating and air conditioning. These are 200 to 300% more efficient than fossil fuel technology. 3rd, promotion of carbon sequestration through nature, capturing CO2 through forests, soils, and wetlands. 4, establishing career ladders for green energy and green technology jobs. And 5, developing a solar canopy plan for Connecticut. We made so many concessions on this bill, and at the end it was supported by so many advocates and also by the Connecticut Business and Industry Association. Also failed a bill with tools and resources for shoreline communities facing sea level rising. A food waste diversion bill did not pass. This bill would have helped to reduce 22% of our solid waste stream. Neither of the pesticides bills passed. The only thing I can say is that we will be there next year if I am elected. Certainly I will be waiting as hard as I did during the last session. On this bill, 5004, we started working way in the summer before the session started. And we are meeting tomorrow in Chester with advocates and a group of people in the environment, my colleagues in the Environment Committee that prepared and wrote this bill. And we will start working to see what we have to improve, what we have to do to bring this bill back into the floor in the next session. And certainly, since we mentioned, I was very proud and very pleased what we did at the State House with my colleagues in bringing funding for our nonprofits. We mentioned some, let's mention all. We got funding for Barbara House, we got funding for Family House, Family Centers, we got funding for the Alliance, Greenwich Alliance on Education, we got funding for Waste Free Greenwich. For United Way, we got funding just to support just the cost of early childhood education to families on ALICE on the public school systems. And United Way agreed not to charge any administration overhead charges on the funding that we allocated to them. And the other ones that we mentioned, Greenwich Library, Parson's Cottage, and I think that we are, and the River House too, that we're so pleased that we were able to pitch in and help the beautiful work that they do with our seniors. And so we will be ready. Next year will be a tough year, as Ryan very well described. There are many costs that we pass this year, especially on higher education for our state colleges, that they are recurrent, and they are under a process of a huge reform. And they will have to keep doing it. Will be a challenge next year, because we will certainly be uncompromised in our fiscal guardrails, sorry, thank you. And so will be a very challenged year next year, the discussion of the 2-year budget. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
And Hector, I'd only complain that you didn't mention Camp Seton, where you got money for the bridge and dragged me up there in the middle of a heat wave to inaugurate the bridge.
Jim Adams will kill me.
Exactly. So, on commerce, I wouldn't say that I sat with any disappointments. I nearly got sideswiped, and it came into the special session for the bill. That was the most controversial, the SHPA. So I'm satisfied there, no disappointments. On the floor of the Assembly, and it was sponsored by one of our more progressive members, it was a study of the benefits cliff. And we were in the process of bringing forth a study of benefits cliffs. And I'll explain it in simple terms. You know, we live in a very fortunate, blessed community, for the most part. Well, we have 30% of our population is an ALICE population. They're income constrained, they have social needs, they have economic needs. Housing is extraordinarily expensive. Some people are on Section 8 vouchers, some people are on a housing authority. The state structure on social aid has what you call a benefit cliff. And what does that mean? It means if you get $1 more or $5 more, your benefits go to 0. And if you're looking to incorporate people into the American dream and incentivize people, I can't think of anything more horrific than to tell somebody, if you work hard and get a promotion, you're going to lose a significant part of your income. The Almighty agrees. There we go. So I think it's important that when we build a social safety net, that is so, you know, there's arguments about social safety nets and are they permanent, are they temporary? But if you build a social safety net whose message is don't get a promotion or don't get ahead, or you have a problem, I think it's a horrible signaling, and I would like to see that brought forward in the next session. That, and one thing that I worry about because of the financial situation with the ARPA funds, etc., is early childhood education, where you want to close the achievement gap. You want to provide, I mean, you're talking about $11,000 to $15,000 to $20,000 a year for early childhood education. How do you expect people at the bottom rungs of the income stream to show up for work and to have 2 people working when they can't afford childcare or their compensation is less than the childcare? Those are 2 that I think provide roadblocks to the American dream, and we need to figure out how and when we can afford to improve those. So those, I think, are failures, not of the session, but of our structural issues that we need to address if we're trying to build a glorious union and comprehensive in our approach. The other measure that was mentioned by Ryan was the fiscal guardrails. Now, the fiscal guardrails are super important, and why? They constrain our spending, they pay down our debt, they improve our structure. If you sat in corporate America, where I sat for many years, you need a track record that goes beyond 6 years. You need a track record of 10, of 12, of 15 years to convince corporate leadership and relocation specialists that you're serious. So one of the important things when you are trying to manage a state, it's like managing a tourist destination. You cannot afford volatility in how you treat the tourists. You cannot afford volatility in how you treat the economic welfare of the residents or potential residents. So you need a calm and steady improvement of the economic situation. I think Rachel mentioned the upgrades. Well, I'll only correct it, I think there have been something, since I've been here, there've been 6 or 7 upgrades by the rating agencies. We're on the right path, but complacency is the enemy of success. And so staying the course is super important, and those are things I worry about going forward. And I think that's it.
Before I say anything, I want to mention to anyone who's interested, I have a couple of major public acts that we passed, so I have about several copies. Not enough for everybody, but happy to get more for anybody who's interested in diving into more specifics on some of the bills that we passed. I think I'm going to agree. One of the biggest disappointments was the lack of progress on environmental legislation. There were 2 important bills House Bill 5004 came before us in the House, did not get a vote in the Senate. Similarly, there was a Senate bill that didn't come before us in either the Senate or the House. And I think that is, it's a shame because we're a coastal community and we need to really start thinking about how we're going to address climate change and coastal resiliency and also protecting the residents who live on the coasts, but also in other parts that are seeing increased flooding and the other effects of climate change. Also, the association healthcare plans. Steve and I had a roundtable at the Women's Business Development Council last winter, and in addition to early childhood education programs and childcare programs, this was another issue that came up as important for small businesses. So I was unhappy that bill didn't come before us, and also the licensing fees. I think we really need to focus on initiatives to make it easier for businesses and families to call Connecticut home. Ryan's bill on capping licensing fees was an important one. Also, in the last session, we voted to join the nursing and social worker compacts. We need to look at more opportunities like that, which will make it easier for people from our state to work in participating states and vice versa, so that we can really grow our pool of employees in those fields that are really in need at this time. I mentioned, I think, funding for early childhood education programs. I think that's a big priority to make it easier for people to go back into the workforce. And protecting our guardrails. So I think I agree with all of my colleagues on what they highlighted as some of the big disappointments for the session.
Thank you so much, and now we're going to start with Hector. You all have addressed already many of the top questions that came in from the audience in advance. But we received the most questions around housing and affordable housing and senior housing. And you have touched on this a little bit, but I invite you to go explore it a little bit more, share your thoughts around the challenges and opportunities around the subject of housing in our region. Starting with Hector, if you'd like.
And first I will read what I said in 2020. I repeat it in 2022, and I maintain it today. And there are a couple of developments that happen in the meantime. Let me find that to be precise. If I put it here is here, but let me go over that. Number one, yes. Or let me start with what a study that WESCO, and Greenwich is part of WESCO, just finished on affordable housing and financing of housing in Greenwich. One of the conclusions is that affordable housing and local zoning are two different issues, two separate issues. And for affordable housing, the proposal for the study that was included is, number one, you need the town engagement, first of all. That can be done through an affordable housing plan that we pass in Greenwich. I am in the RTM too. That can be done through the Affordable Housing Trust. I was part of working hard with Steve on the RTM on the Affordable Housing Trust, and you were there too, Brian, I think, back then. And finally, it wasn't an easy task, but we passed it. But we have to do more. We have to do more with affordable housing. Supporting Greenwich communities, that Greenwich communities is the only one that have been doing things in Greenwich. And Greenwich community did it with state tax reimbursement and with low rate financing from Fannie Mae and Fannie Mac. Zero participation of the town. So everything that can be done was by them. And I had the opportunity to visit every single development that they have done. We have to support them, and we need a long-term plan of how we address affordable housing. Housing is the #1 priority for the governor in Connecticut. If we want to grow the economy, when a business from overseas or from other states, so they want to open in Connecticut, they ask in that order the following questions. #1, housing. Where shall I place all the employees, my staff that will be working in the company? Second, public education. What type of education we will have in the district available for those families? And third, only third comes the cost of taxes in the state. But the first one is housing and education. We are short 100,000 houses in Connecticut. If we want to keep growing the economy, we need to do something at the state level. The governor had give a great amount of incentives. He put $800 million into communities that are willing to just either through transit-oriented, that would like to just promote and build new houses in the state.
Thanks. So Steve, and I invite everyone to have an opportunity to address housing, but we also are going to ask to keep answers a little bit more brief going forward so that we can turn to the audience in about 5 or 6 minutes. No. Thank you.
Okay, so housing, affordable housing, 830G is on everyone's lips. And I've said it once and I'll say it again, local zoning and control of local zoning is important or imperative. And I defend local zoning control. That being said, we have seniors, we have workforce, we don't have a policy or plan in town. We've expanded to some extent, converting in Armstrong Court, all, as Hector said, with state funding. If I asked you, and myself included, I have to say, before I ran for state office, I sat down with the Housing Trust Fund, and I was kind of curious, having worked on the RTM forever. And I said, how come we never see your budget? And they looked at me as if I was speaking Greek or Swahili. And I said, why? And they said, because you don't get a cent from the state, from Greenwich. In fact, they pay $500,000 roughly a year in payment in lieu of taxes for the properties they have, right? I think one of the assistances, they have a town-owned property that they get a free lease on for the housing authority. But going forward, it's not a question of subsidizing the housing in terms of living. It's a question of, are we doing anything where we want it, with our planning and zoning to expand our footprint, where the community agrees to do it. I want to be very emphatic on that. It's a community involvement and a community agreement. It's not my imposition. I've been told, and I have listened to my community, that we want local control. I will continue to vote that way. But the number of communities in the state that are outside the target or outside the purview that have the view of Hartford is significant. And we all 4 have voted for local control. And that's 4 votes, 3 votes in the House out of 151, and that's 1 and a couple other votes in the Senate out of 36. So we have to be able to prepare our own homegrown solution, I think, over time. And that's my only suggestion. I think we need to defend our rights, we have to defend our charter, but, you know, as I say facetiously, the Nancy Reagan just say no is not necessarily the smart strategy. I will carry the strategy, but we need to be considerate that we need to have our own nuanced and important response. And that would be what I'd say there.
Thanks, Steve. Rachel?
I think Hector and Steve have said it all. You know, we've all voted in favor of local control. We will continue to do so. But you know, as Hector referred to WestCog, which is the Western Connecticut Council on Governments. As this report noted, you know, we need to address the need for housing, workforce housing, and other housing in order to grow our economy. So we need to figure out a way around this, and certainly it's incumbent upon us as a municipality to find the tools, to use the tools we have at our disposal to figure out a solution. And you know, we have the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, we have Greenwich Communities, and you know, we are happy to work with them to find solutions as best as we can.
Well, I think we need to fight tooth and nail to protect local control of our towns and cities, especially over decision-making related to zoning and development. And it's very much at risk in the years to come. I said at the beginning that I was proud that we actually had a positive year, modestly positive year, defending local control in the state legislature. I was proud to pass the bill to return charter change rights to voters on the local level related to planning and zoning. I was proud to co-author a minor reform of 830G to give us a little bit better chance at getting moratorium as towns or cities. And I was also happy that we did stop any major transit-oriented development push to up-zone around transit districts. But it's going to only get harder in the years to come. Currently, there is a task force related to fair share that you remember was passed in its 1.0 form, in its initial form, which is basically 830G on steroids. It stands the chance of doubling our mandate as towns or cities in the years to come if it's passed in full. The task force that was passed, or the bureaucracy that was passed, without the enforcement mechanism, will draw up what towns or cities' fair share, quote unquote, of affordable housing is. In the initial contemplation of the proposal from 2 years ago, that entails potentially upzoning, so taking away your zoning to get to the mandate, or forcing towns to pay for it themselves, which means your property tax is going up by thousands, tens of thousands of dollars potentially. That task force is now working. Its appointments, which we just saw today, include some of the most aggressive 830G developers in the state who will help design what the fair share calculation is. And then next year or the year after, the legislature will come back and try to pass the enforcement mechanism, which means taking away zoning rights or requiring that there's taxpayer subsidization at the local level to meet the mandate. So we have to be fighting harder than ever before in the years to come. It's bad enough now, but you're going to think that 830G is a walk in the park if fair share passes in the years to come. So we're going to have to fight like hell in the next 2 years.
Thanks, Ryan. And I'm only going to go to one more set of questions that came in advance, and that's around gun safety. And I would ask you all to just give highlights of your thoughts around Connecticut gun laws. I think we had quite a few questions that came in, and work ahead and your perspective. If you would keep these answers to just 30 seconds, then the audience can start thinking about the questions that they would like to ask to add to this conversation. So Steve, top line comments.
So I'm proud of the Connecticut position on gun safety and the regulatory framework we have today. Where do we fail in Connecticut? Probably at the level of community involvement and engagement, where what we see is the resolution of conflict with weapons. You know, so community engagement, community involvement to get misdirected youth away from gun violence is super important. The rest of the equation is federal regulatory reform and registration. As I've said many times, you know, if I have 3 children, if I walked into a police station and said I lost one and I'd like to buy another, they probably would lock me up. You can buy 50 guns. I don't know that you ever have to prove your ownership or your registration is checked. The amount of, people need to realize guns are manufactured legally. For the most part, they're sold legally. And somewhere in the mix-up, they disappear the chain of ownership and they end up on the black market. That's a fact in the United States. We know where a lot of those guns come from. In Chicago, they come from Indiana. Here, they come up, they call it the gun trail from the South. We need to reform the regulatory process to tamp down on illegal ownership. That's a super important issue. Too many people in the United States die from gun violence. It's depressing. And not only is it an issue of death, it's an issue of cost. Because the emergency rooms are loaded up and you're paying for it with your insurance bills.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, I think we're very fortunate here in Connecticut. We have very strong gun laws, gun violence prevention laws. We recently got an A from the Giffords Law Center on the strength of our gun violence prevention laws. And in 2023, we passed a big bill, I'm going to go very fast, on gun, further strengthening our gun violence prevention laws. The bill restricted open carry, banned ghost guns, and closed some of the existing loopholes around ghost guns, limited handgun purchases to 3 and 30 days, had safe provisions on safe storage and trigger locks, expanded our assault weapon ban, and had penalties for failing to report lost or stolen guns. So I think we're doing well. There's more that we can do, and I think we just need to keep making progress as fast as we can.
I think our state needs strong gun safety laws and effective enforcement of those gun safety laws to keep people safe. I was proud to co-sponsor House Bill 5467 this past year, which will strengthen universal background checks in the state, which I think one of the most important policy mechanisms for keeping illegal guns off the street and protecting people. We also need better enforcement in the state. There's a report out of the state government a couple years ago that found that 75% of all gun charges, gun arrests in the state are either dropped or dismissed. And so if we're not enforcing them, the laws are as good as the piece of paper that they're written on. There is the ability of police officers to take hundreds of illegal guns off the street through something called consent searches, which is proactive policing. And I think that bringing that practice back will take hundreds of illegal guns off the street in the future. There's another bill a couple of years ago that I think had some good in it, some bad in it, and I was opposed to it. But I also we got to make sure that we try to find common ground and that we also always propose alternatives. And so some of the alternatives, in addition to strong universal background checks, should be taking illegal guns off the street as vigorously as possible through that proactive policing, those consent searches. We need to support our school resource officers statewide. We cannot be automatically paroling, as one Senate bill, which passed the Senate but not the House, would potentially do. We cannot be automatic paroling. We cannot be commuting the sentences of severe offenders, murderers, gangbangers, illegal gun owners who have been arrested. So we need strong gun laws, and we also need stronger enforcement.
Thank you. Not much else to add. We all supported the bills, and we in the House passed them in 2023 and 2024 as a challenge moving forward in Connecticut, despite the fact that we are one of the states with the better gun laws in the country. Will be, as Dave said, ghost guns. Ghost guns is a challenge that we will have to look deeper into, and how we avoid that gun trail coming from other states illegally into our state.
Thanks, Hector. So now we're going to turn it over to the audience, and I would like to again ask you to really keep your questions as a question. We have 15 minutes remaining in the program. My daughters Nora and Hannon are going to come around, and I think what I'd like to try is that you direct your question to an individual legislator, and we just have one person answer if that works, and we try to have a question for each legislator. So I'm going to give the microphone, I'm going to try to facilitate, but I'm going to give the microphone to Nora.
And the first question is up in the third row there. So say who you're addressing it to. Thank you.
Great news. Hi, everybody. Thanks for hosting, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm still very upset about the wetlands issue. I'm very, very upset that there was only $1,000 fine for Lamont and the destruction of 180 trees and wilderness. And the conversation about the environment is falling on very deaf ears over here. My concern about the theoretics about the climate warning, but we have the actual destruction of preserved, federal, state preserved land. My question would be per hectare. So as far as your committee, as far as what's going on as the climate change, are you aware that that level of destruction of the ecosystem with the flora, with the animals, could have actual consequences for our local environment and climate? Has that been discussed? Because 180 trees and thousands of wildlife, the actual flora and animals, no matter how much that they can try to replace it, 1,000-year-old trees have a lot of animals in each one. And those animals are killed. So what is this discussion about accountability so that the wetlands that have been protected federally and stately are still protected?
Thank you for your question. Just let me say that this past year, it was a record in terms of acres. I don't remember the numbers, but it's record. Never in the past so many acres of land have been put in the hands of land preservation in the state by Governor Ramon. He led that initiative during this year, and so yes, we are very much aware. We work hard. We try to compromise. We try to address the issues, and there are many, and certainly we will keep trying. We will keep trying despite our own disappointments.
Thank you, Hector. And now we're going to move on here, and if you don't mind standing up. Nope. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Name is Steve Hall, resident of Greenwich. I'll direct my question to Mr. Fazio. We have had private discussions about this matter. There are two different matters. On the affordable housing issue, we've had 35 years to come up with a plan. What is our plan? We've done nothing to come up with our own plan to answer the affordable housing. That I think is primarily important. We seem allergic to professional planning in Greenwich, and we really need to get away from that and get some professional advice. Number two, very quickly, the cheapest and cleanest energy is the energy we don't use. And I'm very disappointed that 5004 did not pass. That would enhance our opportunity to do that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve, for the question. First, I think the fact that there are almost no municipalities who have reached the 830G requirement in the 30 years since it's been passed is more evidence of 830G's failures than any municipality's failures. It's almost self-evident that it's the case. 830G does not allow towns to count affordable housing unless it's deed restricted or government housing. So if I'm renting out, an apartment, a studio, whatever, for on the cheap, that counts as affordable just by virtue of the rent. It wouldn't count as affordable housing under the state statute. That's a huge mistake. Whenever you build market rate housing, even if you're not reducing the amount of affordable housing you build, you're actually reducing your affordable housing score under 830G. That's wrong. That's actually disincentivizing towns and cities from creating housing, where there are so many ways that we could actually incentivize the creation of more affordability in our housing system. Look at the cost. Look at Connecticut has the second or third highest property taxes in the country, maybe not in Greenwich, but elsewhere. That's about 3% of someone's income. If you do the math, compared to the average state in the country, no one talks about property taxes when they talk about affordable housing. Maybe that's because some of the people pushing the most radical legislation are more interested in taking away our rights as towns and cities rather than actually solving the problem. So no one's talking about property tax. We could do a property tax cap like they do in Massachusetts or New York. I think that's modest. And we could do things like more accessory dwelling units, more mixed use residential development. There are trade-offs that could be made. Take away the all or nothing, taking away local control laws like 830G or fair share, and I'll put on the table things like more accessory dwelling units, more mixed-use residential, and workforce housing, and so on and so forth. I agree on reducing is a great way to do things. Demand response, AMI, advanced metering infrastructure would be a good way to improve reliability on the highest demand, peak demand days.
Thanks, Ryan. And there's a question in the back.
Hi, yes. My name is Dave Lancaster. I'm a resident of Greenwich. Debbie's been here for almost 110 years. But anyway, before I begin,
You're looking very good, Brian.
Fifth generation. A lot of Republicans, so I'm good help.
There you go.
So,
Hold the mic close to your mouth,
I'm
please.
sorry. So anyway, thank you all for your service, sincerely, and thank you for being here today. Just a quick question. Ryan talked about the Fair Share Act. I just wanted to ask Representative Kahana, where do you stand on the Fair Share Act in terms of its future? And I know you fellas, basically, everyone pretty much said they're for local zoning, but can you explain why you voted for 5390, which would have taken away the power of states to, municipalities and cities to have control of the zoning and put it to a czar, even though you had an opt-out option there? So if you,
Okay, first of all,
this is
I'm
Mr. Rachel.
No, I know, but I appreciate that we all voted for it.
Okay, go ahead.
So,
Well, let's.
But I asked Rachel.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your question. So on the question of fair share, I think all of us voted against that bill, and I agree with Ryan that it is very problematic. I don't think these one-size-fits-all approaches are what are going to get us to our goal of finding more housing. On the transit-oriented development bill, that didn't expand 830G, and it was an opt-in for the municipality. It wasn't an opt-out, it was an opt-in. And I think we had extensive conversations with the executive director of the Western Connecticut Council of Governments. We had extensive conversations with Margarita Alden, who is the chair, the commissioner of our planning and zoning, and made a lot of amendments to the bill to get it to a place where we felt comfortable and that it would meet some of the needs for housing. And if Greenwich didn't want to opt in, it wouldn't have had to opt in. It won't have to. The bill ultimately didn't pass. So I think, we had, like I said, we had a lot of conversations to get to the bill, to get a lot of amendments to the bill that were favorable to us.
And Steve, do you want to add something briefly?
Yeah. Because it arose in the press, I just want to be explicit. There was an opt-in bill creating financial incentives. I'd like the town to create financial incentives to look to do affordable housing where it wants to. The choice was for the residents, through both the RTM, who anoints or appoints our planning and zoning, to decide whether or not to opt into a plan that had financial incentives. There was no mandate, there was no requirement, and it had an interesting concept. Where I was looking, and potentially if there was willingness or interest, was in downtown Greenwich if they so chose. The discretion exists at the level of the town. It remains there. We will continue to defend that.
Thanks, Steve. So we have about 4 questions. I see maybe 5, and we have 6 minutes. So brief questions.
I will
and
try
brief
to be brief.
answers.
Thank you for your help. My name is Christina Sarro. I have been in front of you a number of times. Hi, Stephen. You've been the one that has helped me so much. Our wonderful governor put together a commission that is going to help everyone in our state to help renters. There is no one that's ever helped renters that overcomes the people that raise our rent. And right here in Greenwich, we have many places right now that raise the rent way above, especially what senior citizens can afford. And I've had many friends that have had to leave the places where they've lived 15, 20, 25 years because their rent went from $2,000 a month to $3,000 a month to $4,000, and right now $5,000 a month. And of course they had to leave Greenwich because they couldn't afford that. So what I'm asking you is this commission still isn't formed here in Greenwich. Every time I call, every 3, 4, 5 weeks, oh yes, we're putting it together.
Thanks for making it a question.
So please, can you help get that done? Anybody? Any of you?
You have to think.
Pardon me?
You have to pick.
I tried.
Which one of us?
I keep trying, and every time I call, nobody helps.
No, I'm saying you have to pick which one of us answers.
Who would
None
like
of
to
you-
answer?
None of you have that.
Oh, yes. I just said you had a pick.
Okay, 20-second
I'll
answer.
grab
Thank
mine.
you.
Thank you.
I think when we talked about affordable housing,
I know that's
I-
important, believe me.
no, when we talk about affordable housing, we talk about, there's a question about measurement sticks. There's a question about what's affordable. The stock of housing in the state of Connecticut is insufficient. The building stock of the state needs to grow. The question is, where does Greenwich, if it does want to grow, want to grow? The Fair Rent Commission, when it is charged and up and running and functional, is only to resolve disputes. It's not to enforce a price or a price control. So it will not solve the problem of rising rents. The problem of rising rents is only solved by a decrease in demand, which usually will happen by an increase in supply, right? So without an increase in supply across the state, rents will be under pressure. And that, I don't know how we solve that issue without increasing the supply.
Well, how do we stop these greedy people that keep doing this to these, and they're all senior citizens?
We want to get to a few other people.
No, I appreciate your concern.
Hi, I'm Louisa Green, and I'm on the board of the League of Women Voters, and I have a question for Ryan. Ryan, the League is always brainstorming on how to engage the under 35. You still qualify. I would love to get your, oh no, Hector, you and I, no. Ryan, I would love to get your feedback on how the League of Women Voters can enhance our, our outreach to the under 35, our future here in Connecticut, to engage, inspire, and get them to be part of the, voting process. Thank you.
Thank you, Louisa. I got 1 year left. So I would say a couple things. If you look at younger voters, Gen Z is more so than millennials nationwide. They're disaffiliating with parties. I think they're fed up with politics in this country because it's gotten so ugly, and who can blame them? Maybe they're wiser than we give them credit for. But I also see so many young people in this town engage in the political process, whether it's joining my campaign. It feels like my campaign has, more teenagers than anyone else, and I feel like they understand once they see it that getting involved on the local level, trying to address issues, trying to bring people together, trying to avoid the nastiness of whatever's on your TV and cable news, that not only is it better than they originally thought and less scary than originally thought, but it is that there is a better opportunity to make progress and make the world a better place when you start local, when you deal with issues, when you don't look at people who disagree with you as your enemy, but rather simply your neighbor who has a disagreement. And so I think through all those ways, we do have a chance of engaging younger people in politics better than we have. I'm still holding out hope. I don't know all the answers, but I'm still holding out hope.
Thanks. And I think that's a really wonderful note to end on. So I know there were questions we didn't get to, but we have a hard stop at 7:30. I want to thank so sincerely our legislators for being here and for their thoughtful answers and really great discussion, and to our audience for participating. So many thanks. Thanks for coming, everyone.